The Repast Podcast may include detailed discussions about death, the human body after death, and the medical process that may be sensitive or disturbing to some listeners and viewers. Our goal is to educate and inform with respect and care. We encourage listener and viewer discretion, especially for younger audiences or those who may find these topics emotionally challenging. Welcome back to the Repast Podcast. This is part 2 of our special series, The Science of the Body, Forensics, Facts, and the Final Say. In this 2-part conversation, we're taking you behind the scenes to explore what happens to the body after death with our experts, LaTasha Davidson from the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office and Wallace Williams, retired mortician from James H. Cole Home for Funerals. Let's get into it.
And then we just heard, we said, what in the world? The biggest guy in my mortuary class, boom, fainted. He was out.
Wow.
That's all he needed. How in depth, as far as being in the embalming room and trying to have somebody visible so their family can see them one last time when they're viewable, what are those extra steps that you guys take in the back of the house to make them appear as natural as possible?
So our goal is always viewing. That's what I was told from day one. The goal is always viewing. So on a decomposed case, there are certain fluids that you would use to preserve the body and to make sure that the tissue is firm and dry. That makes the cosmetics easier to apply. And typically with the decomposed case, you're going to have to use a lot of cosmetics in most cases. So the biggest thing is also just making the family aware of that. It's important for the family to know the condition, because if they're thinking that, the picture that you gave me, this is what you're going to have, that's not the case for a decomposed case. So you have to be upfront and say, there will be, a lot of cosmetics that are used or, heavy cosmetics that are used, but the goal is always to make sure the person is viewable. So you go off that picture and you just do the best you can, like Wally said. We can't guarantee that this picture that you gave me is, is what you're going to see, but we're going to try to get as close to that as possible.
And one thing you have to understand with a decomposed body, when a body decomposes, it gives off an odor.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to try to block the odor. That's what that is. Great stuff.
Save the day.
Great stuff. But that's a chemical they just came out with not too long ago, a few years ago, that it blocks the smell. Because the smell is, he can tell you, the smell stays with you for days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another problem we have, You don't want to walk into a room and smell your loved one before you get there.
Right. Then that's kind of that old stigma of, it smells like a funeral home.
Exactly.
You don't want that.
You don't want
try
that at all.
Right. You try to mask that and make it as peaceful and presentable as possible.
That's right.
Now, Wallace, over your years of experience, have you ever had a family or experienced a family that wanted to try to take part in the preparation process?
Yes. And by Michigan law, we can't do it. Michigan law says that only a licensed funeral director or a resident trainee is even allowed in the prep room. Mm-hmm. Now, one time we did get a variation that the son was a physician. And we had to go through your grandfather, who was the owner then, to get permission to have him come in because he wanted to see the body was embalmed because it was going to be shipped back to Africa. So he wanted to see everything that was being done. So they gave him permission because he was a medical doctor.
He was a medical doctor.
Right. So he kind of got the stipulation. That's the only time I've ever known that anybody was able to come in other than a licensed funeral director or a resident trainee.
And those are those situations where we can kind of let a family know we're not saying you're not allowed. This is the law. You cannot do it.
And I do it. And you do it for a reason, because there are going to be emotions done. There's things we're going to do to the body that you go, oh, no, don't do that. Don't cut. Don't do,
Right.
And certain things we have to do.
And that's kind of the burden of our job, is that there are certain things that we must do. They're not the prettiest things. They're not, something you'd want to freely talk about, but there are things that we have to do as a part of the embalming process that's not, for the faint of heart, and I'm sure you guys get that at the medical examiner's office. There's some things that must be done no, we're not going to take you through the ins and outs of them, but there are things that must be done for an autopsy to take place. Now, Wallace, you can touch on this where I remember a case where it was a gentleman that was found in a field and he was laying face down, but elements, I'll put it, had gotten to the other side of his face. How does that, when that kind of a case comes into the funeral home, how do you then attack that for a restorative arts angle and being sure the family can view their loved one for a last?
You try and hope that the other side is there so you have something to judge what you need to build on. That particular case, the skin was gone. It was only bone. So we had to build up with wax and wire his cheek, his jaw, make him some lips, do all these things, and then have to color the wax to make it look like the other side, and then give the illusion that he was found healthy. He was nothing wrong with him. But you're probably looking at 8, 10, 12 hours worth of work to put it on there. That's what people don't understand. Any kind of wound, shotgun blast, stabbing wounds, all those things have to be fixed and then covered to look as natural as possible. And that's where the art of mortuary science comes in. It's not necessarily this part. This part is one part, but the actual art to put the person back. You understand? Remember modeling class and all the stuff we had to go through? We had to learn how to make ears and lips and noses and everything because we have to rebuild those things if they're not there. Because you go in a room, you want your loved one to look like nothing ever happened to them. And it's been a traumatic death. But they want to see what they want to see.
Now, I got a question for you, because I know when you're standing over a case on the embalming side of it, and once you get to the case and you see what you have to work with, for instance, you may see the top half, but there's nothing nose down. So what are the thoughts that you have, or what, in your mind, what are your first steps that you have to attack before you can even get to the art side of it?
Well, you've got to preserve the tissue for one thing, because if you can't preserve the tissue, waxes won't adhere to wet tissue or moist tissue. Then you've got to use geometry, because you've got to look at the face, and we know that the face is 5 eyes wide and with so many noses long. And then you got to try and imagine in your mind how it's going to be made, and it's got to be contoured. And so you have to do that. So if there's nothing there, you have to build it with wire. And after the wire, you have to build it with plaster Paris. And after the plaster Paris, you have to build it with wax. Then you have to color the wax. So all these things take time, and you're supposed to make it look like the person. So you're looking at a picture, and you hope the picture is relevant because the picture is 25 years old. And I don't know how many of you have ever gone to a funeral. You go into the room and you see the obituary, and they've got the guy's picture when he retired from the Army in 1954, and this is 2025. And you go, well, who is this? So, relevancy helps us a lot.
And oftentimes that's what they give you for restorative work. This
exactly
high school picture.
This high school picture, and that's not relevant. So it takes a long time to do it. And the makeup that we use, people don't understand, is mortuary makeup. And the mortuary makeup has a petroleum base in it. The petroleum base does a couple things. It adheres, it stays moist, and it doesn't lose its color. So that's why we don't care about Mary Kay, because Mary Kay is something that you use for a couple hours. Powder will look just like powder. He'll look like Herman Munster when you get done with him, just the powder on him. And so that's why we always tell people, well, you can bring lipstick. Lipstick is fine. But we don't need Mary Kay. We don't need any of those kind of things like that. Maybe a little blush. But it does not help us when we're kind of contour the whole face. Because remember, if I repaired this with one color, now I've either got to make everything else the same color. So I can't do it with Mary Kay. I've got to use the mortuary makeup. If we don't, we got to go back every day to try to fix it. Well, mortuary makeup will hold its color because it's a petroleum-based makeup. It's a specialty makeup. You can't buy it. Only we can buy it.
Same way as a chemical. Same way as embalming chemical. Everything is made and everything is specific for the mortuary industry. And it's for a reason and for a good reason.
And the one good thing about with us is enough of us working there, I'll work on something, then I'll go and say, India, what do you think? She might come in and say, that nose is not straight enough. I say, okay. Brice, what do you think? We get everybody's opinion on it because we all look at it a little differently in order to get a finished product that everybody's comfortable with. So it's a process. Repairs take a long time, and people don't understand. Restorations are very, very difficult, very, very time consuming.
Because every time you look at them, you see something different.
And along with that science and being a part of what happens, what type of trauma happens to you when you're on when you have a case on the embalming table and they're stab wounds. Could be nothing in the face, but there's stab wounds in the chest, on the arms, on the legs. Explain to people how that has to be specially addressed in order to be sure that the embalming process is completed and completed correctly.
Well, you've got to make sure that all those areas are completely embalmed. And they're not going to be embalmed unless you actually use something like a hypo, which is a huge hypodermic needle, and you have to actually do those areas separately. Then you have to put adhesive in it and sew them up so they don't leak, because leakage is one of our major, major problems. If we have leakage, then we have severe problems. And so what you see underneath, you don't think it's nothing there, but there's something there. I've had several people say, why do you hear that sound? Well, a lot of times we have to put a plastic suit on underneath because of the problems that we're going to have. We don't know where the IV parts are. And pressure inside the body is always greater than pressure outside. So everything inside wants to come out. And so that's why we end up with all these precautionary things that we do. Don't touch, don't do this, don't move everything, because everything is precisely set for a certain way so that we don't have problems. Sometimes we ask for gloves because the hands are damaged. Sometimes we ask for something for the head because the head is damaged, like a bonnet or a hat. So we try to minimize what the family sees, but maximize their experience that that's their loved one, and they can have the grieving process that they need. So.
Now, how have you dealt with situations or your verbiage for families who are high in emotion? They're coming in for their first view to see, their loved one that has had traumatic injuries, heavily cosmetized, wax, everything. And they go in for first view, kissing all over their loved one, and everything that we've done, you have to go back and redo. How does that conversation go for you? Because you're typically very good with your words.
I've had experience where you walk in, they say, somebody messed the body up. And I'm standing there looking, and there's makeup all over the casket. And I'm standing there, and there's one guy with his hands behind his back, and he's got makeup on his hands. People are gruesome. They want to see where the wounds are. So they'll move makeup, and they want to look, where did he get shot at? I don't believe, oh my God, it was that bad. So we would just ask that, don't touch. It's several hours of work in that, and it takes you several minutes to mess it up. It's heartbreaking because, she does a lot of makeup, and they'll look and she'll say, oh my God.
Yeah.
I have to go in there and try to tell them, why can't I touch? That's my loved one. But we're trying to repair the damage that was made. You want your loved one to look as best he can, and we can't do it if you keep taking the makeup off, if you keep gouging the wax out, if you keep doing all, just let us do what we can do. We're doing the best we can do with what we got. And, but those emotions, sometimes you have to ask them to leave. You have to leave and just come back in a couple hours. I hope they calm down. Go get a cup of coffee or something. Because you can't argue with them. So you're just trying to reason with them.
And that's when the usage of a veil over the casket, ropes around the casket. If you've ever been to a funeral and you see the casket is covered with a veil, or there's ropes and you can't go beyond the velvet rope, that a lot of those situations are done.
A veil means
to
don't
keep
touch.
people away, right?
Don't
a lot of those situations are
touch.
done, right? You have to take precautions. We have to take precautions at the funeral home to protect our work that we've done to give the family that final closure.
Yeah, but it's not an easy thing, and we take it personally because we've done our best at it, and then but people don't understand, and that's why we started taking pictures when they come in now. People come in, we take a picture of what they got. So when you complain so bad, let's say, well, I hate to do this, but this is actually what your loved one looked like when you came. They don't understand all they know is their loved one got shot. They don't tell them what got shot off. They don't tell them how much damage was there. And they just expect us to make it like it never, ever happened. And sometimes you just can't do that. And we're an emotional people, so it's hard. It's hard.
Can you recall your most difficult restorative case? And I know that's a tough question to go back so many cases, but one that stands out the most that you spent the longest time working on.
Well, without getting the details, it was a child. And child that got hit by a truck and delivery truck. And got it in, and her head was completely crushed. And they said, well, we're not going to show the body. Don't worry about it. So I said, well, let's work on it and see what we can do. And I spent probably 3 days, 4 days on it, and was able to show the body. So when we showed it to the mother, she said, I want to see who did this to my baby. And I said, oh, Lord, I'm going to get my behind whooped. Here. And I'm all ready to say I did my best. So we tried to show her. She said, did you do this to my baby? And I said, yes, ma'am, I did. I said, we tried to bring her back to where you thought that you could say your last goodbye. And that lady grabbed me and gave me a bear hug. And I thought I was going to suffocate. She hugged me so hard. But she was so appreciative that somebody, one, took the time. And somebody, we did bring her back 90% of what she looked like. So she was able to grieve now, because it's different. When you're MIA, which is missing in action, it's hard for people to understand that you're gone if they don't just see you gone. Mm-hmm. That was one of the problems with the people coming back from Vietnam War and all that. You tell them that they're deceased, but until I see you. And that's one of the reasons we want you to see a person in the casket. You understand, and that's when you can grieve. Because if you don't grieve, you're going to internalize that for years. And it'll make you sick. It really will. But that was probably the toughest one, because I'm batting back tears and she's batting back tears. I can't breathe. And she's, But that was tough. Anytime you have kids, it's tough. You get kids that have been beaten, or you get kids that have been abused, and it's hard. It's especially if you got kids. It's hard, because why could you do this to a child? The child is defenseless. If you want to whoop on somebody your size, your age. But it takes a lot out of you. You're spent after a while. And then the problem becomes, then you become kind of neutralized everything. Mm-hmm. Stuff don't bother you anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's big.
Having kids yourself, how do you compartmentalize that? Having worked on so many kids and then having to go home to your kids.
I used to go home at night, wake my kids up to make sure they were awake. Mm-hmm. They were breathing. You stand there and watch them. Mm-hmm. But my kids, they knew, and I would bring them to the funeral home. So they were used to it. They were kind of used to what went on. And they knew their daddy was half crazy. So I'm a tinkerer by nature. My daddy was a tinkerer. So we try to fix stuff. And that's just what we try to do. But my kids are good at it. They didn't get hung up in it. And I didn't stop it from my money. This is what I do. And my ex-wife was in funeral service also. So they were surrounded by it their whole life. It's like your kids are, they doesn't bother them, and Antonio's kids, they doesn't bother them, But it is hard. It's hard. It's hard because it takes a lot out of you. And you got to get up before you get out the car, and especially you being a mother, before you get out the car and go in the house, you got to shift gears. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because mommy's exhausted. Mm-hmm. Mommy's had it taken out of her today, but you got to go back to that gear.
Rapid fire questions I'm just going to throw out there to let everybody answer and jump in and take part in. So I'll start off with India. Is it true that a body can move or make sounds after death?
So I'll say in my experience, I've never had a body move on me. But funny story, really quick. I was raising an artery, and the way that I was positioned when I was raising the artery, I lifted a tendon, and the tendon caused the arm to pop up on me. And it scared me. Oh my goodness. It scared the daylights out of me. But I was like, okay, that was me. That wasn't the person. It was me doing that. So yeah.
Now I haven't seen that outside of mortuary school. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
I can attest to a story like that when I was in mortuary school down at Wayne State. And we were all in the embalming lab, all crowded around. And our embalming instructor, she said, now, be careful when you're raising your vessels. Make sure that you have a vessel, yes, because you could have a muscle, a tendon, whatnot, and it could do this.
It happens.
And then we just heard, we said, what in the world? The biggest guy in my mortuary class, boom, fainted. He was out.
Wow.
That's all he needed. That's all he needed. And we said, okay, let's get him off the floor and get him on the seat.
I mean, because can you imagine being zoned out, like you just doing your thing and an arm pops up on you and like pops you?
That's something that people would say, well, what?
Those stories got started from back in the 20s and 30s when they pronounced death. A lot of people weren't actually dead.
Mm-hmm.
Their way of pronouncing death was they put a mirror under your nose. And if the humidity came out and the mirror fogged up, you were still alive. If it didn't, they thought you were dead. Yeah. Well, of course, there were people that got rolled away and then they'd wake up and sit up and go, what's going on? So now when you leave the hospital with all the technology that we have now, you're gone. Mm-hmm. And what people don't understand is if you die on this shift at the hospital, you're not getting out the hospital 2 or 3 shifts later because I hate to say it, but you're not a cash producing person anymore for the hospital. So they're worried about the intake, not the people leaving. And so just because you die today, we may not get you for a day.
And see that.
Yeah, that's very true.
And see that goes to the insurance side
of
that's another episode.
Yes,
but that goes to a whole nother conversation of what happens at the hospital.
Yeah. And I've actually had a body make a sound.
Do that.
I had someone in a garage and they had been there, and when we went to move them, it sounded like a moaning sound. Mm-hmm. And I almost jumped out of my seat because I was like, it was dark. I was like, what is going on? But it's just the air escaping.
It's tissue gas.
Uh-huh.
And I was very scared. But so it does happen, but it's not common.
Tissue gas is the byproduct of decomposition of the muscles in the body, and gas builds up under the skin, and then you get this distortion, and it's got to the point where it's got to come out somewhere. Mm-hmm. So eventually something bursts and you go.
My embalming teacher always said that liquid and air will take the path of least resistance.
Oh yeah.
So if there's any kind of buildup anywhere, if there's a little bit of distension in the lungs, and you move somebody the right way, you're going to get a
yes,
yeah. Whew. Interesting stories. Interesting. Now, LaTasha, is it true that if someone dies and their family can't be reached at all, they're automatically labeled as a John or Jane Doe?
So they're not labeled as a John or Jane Doe, but they do become medical examiner cases.
Okay. That's interesting because, like you said earlier, you guys use those different avenues to identify people, whether it's a neighbor, a church member, a friend, anybody. So you do try to use those avenues, everyone possible, to identify that person.
Right. But if we go out to a scene and let's say a neighbor does identify them, if a family member does not say, hey, we'll take, control of the body, then they become a medical examiner's case because we can't just leave the body in the home. So they're not a Jane or John Doe, but they become a medical examiner's case because we can't just leave the body in the house. And if the family's not going to say, hey, I'm going to call the funeral home, we have to bring them back.
Now, Wallace, bringing all the embalming chemicals and talking about them, how would you answer the question when people say that, well, embalming chemicals they're all harmful to the environment, they shouldn't be used at all?
There is some truth to that. They do have a harmful aspect to them because their main goal is to fix tissue and to sanitize biological agents. So that's why, one, they're not sold to the public. And two, they want us to all be trained and licensed on how to use them. But in order for you to have the preservation that you want with your loved one, you've got to use something like this. Because back in the day, when they first started doing bodies, they used arsenic and mercury, which are two lethal things. They didn't start using embalming fluids until 1878. Dr. Holmes, who invented embalming, actually embalmed Abraham Lincoln when he died. And it became a thing for the Civil War. They wanted to get the guys back. So they did the intravenous embalming. But done for a good reason and done under care, it's okay. It's okay. Because these chemicals you cannot find. You can only buy them from a chemical company, and you have to be licensed to buy them. So you can't get them.
And those special precautions, that we take, like you said, the PPEs that we wear in the embalming room. Even now, ever since COVID, the actual respirator masks that we wear in the embalming room are all designed to protect the embalmer, but also be able to use those chemicals.
Even the air quality. I mean, the air has to be changed 12 to 15 times an hour in the embalming rooms. Luckily, we have a very educated system now. Ours is done about every 90 seconds. So I'm just saying, air quality is another thing that'll get you on these. But they're not made to benefit the living. They're made to benefit the dead. And their specific reason is to stop bacterial growth and to fixate tissue. That's what they're there for.
Now, India, I've had a couple families ask me during the embalming process, I kind of know a little bit about embalming, and I know that, you switch out fluid for blood, and I know that that's kind of the basics of it. But where does the blood go?
So, yes, you are exchanging embalming fluid in place of the blood. So the blood is coming out, and essentially the blood is drained. Blood is drained into our drainage system. That's where it goes. I'm simply put. I tried to think of another way to make it sound better. It goes into the drainage system.
That's kind of my rundown of everybody. I just say, well, be thankful you live in the city of Detroit.
Yes.
Because we have some of the cleanest water in the country.
Yes, we do.
And be happy for that, because that's where the blood goes.
Yes, that's where it goes.
Some places in Florida, that funeral homes have to treat the water before they can let it out into the city sewer system. Our system here is so, I want to say, so educated that it can break down everything you need to have. So we don't have a problem with that.
I've heard stories that families have asked, well, what about you don't have to store it in a container and have it pumped out, and you don't have to do this? I said, no, well, luckily not here. No, we don't have to treat it.
Yep.
We don't have to do anything special. It's right down the drain.
But we mix it with a lot of water.
We do.
Yes.
It's constantly being mixed with water.
There's so much
these
water.
will dilute very, very easily if you mix them with a certain amount of water. So they lose their viability as they're diluted.
Right. As chemicals, as even the embalming chemicals, as they're diluted with the amount of water that they're diluted with at the funeral home, they then start to break down that, I don't want to say harmfulness, but it does dilute the chemical to a certain extent where once it does go through the city filtration, it then becomes clean water.
And let's face it, there's a lot worse things going down the city sewer system than a few chemicals.
There are.
With the amount of people we have in the city.
Right, there definitely are. So that brings us to a close of part 2 of our deep dive into the science of the body. I would like to once again thank our special guest, Mr. Wallace Williams, Mrs. LaTasha Davidson. Thank you so much for being here with us and going through this with everybody. Once again, I'd like to ask everybody to like, comment, and subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on, whatever you're watching on. Please drop us a comment and make sure you submit your questions. We are going to have your questions answered as much as we possibly can. Join us for a next episode at the Repast Podcast for funerals and finance. We're going to walk you through all the steps of financing and what goes on with the funeral as far as taking care of those funds. Once again, I want to remind you, whether you're in service, in grief, or curious, we're here with you every step of the way. Tune in next time to the Repast Podcast.